Okay, Joe Lencki, we're sitting next to this beautiful Indy 500 Roadster. Joe, what year did you build this car?
This car was, we started to build this thing in about 60, and we put it on paper in 60, and in 61 and 62 is when we started and completed the building of the thing. The original frame, if you'll call it that, it's not a frame, it's tubular, and it is a Roadster. Foyt got the original, and it was my design, and Foyt going to Syracuse picked it up, and I agreed to let him have it, and then I got the second one off of my print on this one, and that's when we started to build this car.
Okay, Joe, let's talk a little bit about the construction of the car. How much does this car weigh, approximately?
Its minimum weight, I think minimum weight at that time was 1,400 pounds, and it's minimum. It's probably 1,415 pounds at the speedway. We have to comply with whatever the rule is. Now, they can vary that 50 or 100 pounds, but normally they're over 1,400 pounds.
Okay, and let's talk about the car technically a little. What's the wheelbase on this car, approximately, for the speedway?
It's 100 inches is the wheelbase, and the tread is 52. Again, that's within the requirements of the entry blank, whatever the entry blank will call, and you can vary a couple of inches one way or the other. But it's always that way, and the rules and the entry rules are always set for that, so that we can prepare for it and have a car ready to conform.
Okay, and as far as the fuel supply, we noticed that this car has a very big tail on it. What was the fuel capacity in this race car?
This fuel tank, and that's the only one, it's in the rear, and it is approximately 50 gallons.
I see, and let's see, in the 61-62 era, is that an aluminum tank or fiberglass tank, or is it the rubber bladder type? Do you recall, Joe?
No, it's a steel tank. It's a steel, and naturally it's coated. It's coated with lead and what have you. It's plated with it, and we have to be careful depending on what kind of fuel you're using. You could be, and at that time fuel was wide open. There was no limits on kind or amount. Prior to that, we went from 50 gallons down to 37.5 gallons. And Louis Meyer won the 37 on less than 37.5 gallons. And then we abandoned that and started to make. That's when the car, at that time, the car won the race, and the performance of the car and its design and what have you had all to do because it was an automobile contest. And from there on out, it became a speed and race driver contest, and it has up till now.
I see, and okay, let's talk about the rear end. What type of rear end and what type of suspension does this car have?
The rear end is locked, as they are in all cars at Indianapolis. The track is laid out in such a way that you don't need a differential on there, and by having the lock on there, you've got both wheels pulling all the times, and it's the safe way to do it, because if for any reason you would lose one side of it, you still have the other side of it for safety's sake. If it was one of these road race tracks, well, it'd be advisable to have a differential in there because you need it for the differential and the highway conditions and the roadbed conditions. But since it's a laid-out track, it's what we term a locked rear end. Both rear wheels or all four wheels are pulling all the time.
Okay, Joe, something that I notice a little unusual about this Roadster. In those days, the Roadsters usually had the four-cylinder Meyer and Drake engine, and I see on this exhaust pipe there's 6 tubes coming out of this hood. Let's talk about the Joe Lencki six-cylinder engine?
Well, when I started competing,
Okay, Joe, let's take a look at your six-cylinder engine. How about if I take this cowling off? Would you hand this to me, please?
okay.
Thank you. Wow, that is a beauty. Joe, why a six-cylinder engine?
Well, we have noticed, and I did at least at the time, and that's where we're talking way back now, that sooner or later the fuel efficiencies will be a very major part of engine design. We're right now, 45 years later, polluting ourselves out of existence. And I felt that my approach to fuel efficiency and high mileage, we're talking about 40 or more miles per gallon. You weren't going to do it with a extremely high revolutionary engine, but you're going to need one with a corresponding one for the kind of fuel. Now, we all feel today that we have an unlimited supply of this so-called gasoline, but we don't know positively. And someday, I think we're going to run out, and we're going to use another kind of fuel, one that we'll probably produce and could. But at any rate, I felt that this would be the proper approach and a good starting point, principally because the combustion chamber design permits and would allow for the present fuels, and it wouldn't take too much alteration in the design to conform what the requirements would be in 10, 15 years, yes, 20 years in the future. But the power output, the weight of the engine, and the size of the engine and everything it's very desirable and can be used for any size of car. So consequently, it was the best design at the time and still is today. And in my opinion, for the next future of 15, 20 years.
Let's talk a little bit about when you went on the drawing boards with this engine, Joe. What is the weight of this engine?
The engine itself weighs less than 300 pounds. I would say probably about, maybe 250 pounds.
I see. And, boy, that's pretty light. That's really light.
Well, by comparison, it is. It's compact, and it isn't bulky or large. And after all, the weight of the engine ends at the crankshaft flange, and the flywheel, the bell housing, and the transmission and all that's no longer engine. That's a part of the components required to move this thing forward and back, but it's not engine. The engine ends at the crankshaft, here at this point right here. And it's not bulky, it's compact, and the aluminum, a lot of aluminum here, and the weight of aluminum by comparison with other metals is considerably less.
And in its normal aspirated position here, Joe, what kind of torque, horsepower, RPM, how did you design this engine to run with the fuels that you were using?
Well, an engine, in any way you want to discuss or you want to try to explain what it is, it's nothing but a harness. It's a harness for the kind and the amount of fuel that you're going to burn in it. It harnesses the energy in that fuel. And consequently, that's where you start on the board. At least that's where I start on the board with the design. And
you start with the fuel first, in other words.
I must know what kind of fuel. the engine is going to, what energy it's going to harness.
Okay.
If you use a hydrocarbon fuel like gasoline, then you must have a certain combustion chamber, you must have a bore and stroke and what have you to meet with that requirement. If you have an aromatic fuel, an alcohol, another combustion chamber design. And if you get into a blend, there should have to be some alterations. But this engine, it's very, very flexible in its design, and all you would have to do at any time to meet with any requirements at any time is the valve angle and the size of the ports and the bore and stroke, and you can do that. It's flexible with this thing.
What is the cubic inches of this engine?
This engine was 274 cubic inches.
Okay, and at the time that this engine ran in this Indy race car, approximately what kind of horsepower and RPM was this engine putting out, and torque?
The first time we put it on a dyno was just before Christmas, and I was in Los Angeles on the dynamometer.
What year was that, Joe?
Oh, that was about 1940, 47, 48.
Okay.
And we put it on the dyno. It was just at Christmas time. It was probably 4 or 5 days before Christmas. And
that was at Stu Hilburn's, wasn't it?
Yes, it was on Hilburn's dyno.
Okay.
And
Making all that noise. Action.
Okay, Joe, you were at Stu Hilburn's dyno testing this engine. Let's talk about the performance output of this engine.
Well, with Stu Hilburn's injection system that I had on the engine at that time, and cubic inch for cubic inch, the only other engine that was being used by exclusively all of the contestants at Indianapolis was the 4-cylinder Offenhauser. And the cubic inch displacement of that was approximately 274 cubic inches, and I wanted to stay within that range so we could compare. And we started on the dyno early in the morning, and Lencki treated it the way we do, and we propose and want everybody else to use it.
Excuse me, Joe, how did you Lencki treat the engine?
Well, no, we started with the lubricants that we used for the assembly. We put the same proportions in the bulk and used it to lubricate the various parts in the assembly, which is a little beyond what you do normally with a passenger car, because you're building it from the ground up, unless the manufacturer will start to use it in the manufacturing of their engines, and that's coming, I believe, and I think soon. But in order to get the performance that Lencki, the metal energizer, because that's what you have to do, you have to use it on all the component metals in there. So consequently, as you're assembling, you're using it as a lubricant with the proper oil Lencki proportions, and assemble it that way. And then after you do that, you do the same thing that we advocate and that they use in passenger cars. You mix it with your fuel and oil in the same proportions, and instead of pouring it through the inlet port of a carburetor, like we recommend for passenger automobiles, we remove the spark plugs and we pour it directly into the cylinders and rotate it, and to get the proper and the right amount of distribution over the various parts. And it's the same thing. We fire the engine up, and it's warmed before we do it, and we allow it to set overnight, and the next morning we're ready. warm the engine up, and you're ready for peak performance.
Okay, and then what was the results of this dyno performance test?
If I am not mistaken, the Offenhauser engine put out, about 340 horsepower at that time. And 340 horsepower at 6,000 RPMs. And the torque was approximately, I don't remember offhand, but it was in good proportion in foot-pounds. And when we put this thing on the dyno to compare, at the same engine speeds, we could pull 60 more horsepower at the same engine speed, cubic inch for cubic inch. We didn't over or under, I mean proportionately the same. We pulled 60 more horsepower.
Wow.
And we went over in the torque proportionately the same. And I shut the test down at 6,100 RPMs because I wanted to go home for Christmas. I wasn't going to be delayed.
Was the competition looking through the windows at the shop?
We had an audience of the parking lot in Mr. Hilburn's yard was filled with people, not with automobiles. From Art Sparks on down, they were all there. And Chicky. Chicky was the most anxious one of all.
I see. Well, let's look at this engine, Joe, and just briefly tell us a little now about the combustion chambers and how many valves, etc.
The combustion chamber is, like I said, it's very, very flexible. On my original 6, which was the same in outer proportions, in bulk proportions, exactly the same, in weight almost, within pounds the same, and I had a pent roof combustion chamber and the original 6, and then be very flexible, have now the pent roof combustion chamber.
You mean hemispherical combustion in the first one, don't you?
That's right.
Okay, and then pent roof
Pent
now.
roof now with 4 valves per cylinder, and that's what you have today. You have the same thing today, and I went originally with the spherical because my original design was a 4-cylinder engine with a hemispherical combustion chamber with 2 valves per cylinder.
And what have you found? What is the difference, Joe, between 2-valve and 4-valve?
Well, it all depends on what kind of performance you want. Right now, right today, and this year, fuel efficiency is a major kind of fuel and amount of fuel. One of the world's greatest problems today is the control of emissions in our automobiles. It's going to change the history of the world. We have a blanket and a layer of what these things, these automobiles, are pouring out every day. And that layer is, if we don't control it, is going to change our way of life, because then it's going to affect us in the kind of air we're going to have and the pollutants in the air, and we're going to have to control that. And that's what I had in mind before. My performance was not speed. My performance with this engine was to get the most efficiency out of whatever kind of fuel you're going to use and have the least amount of carbon monoxide discharge from it. And if you can get that down to 0, we've got it made. And right now it's very high. In fact, it's too high, and we're going to have to make either fuel changes or engine design changes and car changes, and who knows, they're even talking about electric power, which is very ridiculous in my opinion. We're going to have to use a fuel, a liquid fuel, in my opinion, and design accordingly.
Okay, so then you went from the 2-valve to the 4-valve design for the reasons that you just gave.
That's right. I feel that you can design a more compact with the 4 valves than you can with the 2 valves, and I think that it's more flexible in its demand for the kind of fuel. You've got a wider range of the various blends with 4 valves. I don't know that for sure. I haven't made the direct comparisons yet, but by the few in comparing with this 6 and the other 2 valve. Now maybe valve changes and valve timing and what have you could make the change. But in my opinion, I think we'll wind up with 4 valves per cylinder.
Okay, Joe, so, and also, how many main bearings does this engine have, Joe?
7.
Wow, that really keeps vibration under control, doesn't
Yes,
it?
well, a 6 or a 12 is the smoothest that you can get.
I see.
And the 4 is the wobbly, and if you got down to 3 and 2, why, they are more prone to create a higher vibration point.
And I notice in front here you have magneto power down in front here. And Joe, this is amazing. I see a big tube, a big plenum here, and I know this is your design because you told me, and I really would like to bite into this now. Can you explain us? What's your ideas behind this design?
Well, if you're going to control and if you're going to do all that is possible to try to eliminate the carbon monoxide, you're going to have to do it there. You're going to have to do it with the fuel that you put in there. Number one, the kind of fuel, how you put it in, the fuel-air ratio, the amount of time it takes, and your goal is to get the exact amount of fuel that you put in that combustion chamber and that it burns 100%. If you burn 100% in the combustion chamber, you have no carbon monoxide.
Okay, Joe, be my teacher now so I understand this correctly. What you're saying is it's important to get the right amount of air with the right amount of fuel in the combustion chamber, and when the spark plug ignites and the flame propagation starts on the power stroke, when it gets to the bottom, you want all the fuel burnt.
That's right. That's right. And if you can get a cold exhaust, if your exhaust pipe is ice cold, and it should be that, you know you have complete combustion.
Is that why I've noticed on some of the photos on your race cars, I've noticed your exhaust pipes, they are not burnt. They don't have that blue look. And why is that, Joe?
Well, by comparison, you can go along the line in Indianapolis at the Speedway, and when the cars are coming into pit for fuel, is a good way to judge how complete the combustion is. Look at the exhaust pipe.
Oh.
The exhaust pipe that has the least amount of discoloration has the fuel efficiency without any other comparison, because it indicates that it's cold. The temperature is very low. And the more discoloration you have, the higher it is. That temperature is higher. And you'll notice with all my cars, from way back from, 1933, that mine are always, right from the port on down, the cleanest that there is in the operation of the Speedway's 500-mile race.
In other words, you had complete combustion, and you weren't after burning the flames in the pipe, which were making these other pipes red hot when they turn blue.
That's right.
That's amazing.
Right. That's right.
Joe, let's talk a little more about, I'm interested, what's inside of that big pipe?
In here, well, I have gone to extremes. There's nothing like this on any kind of engine, internal combustion. This is original. And again, I'm not interested in speed. I'm not interested in horsepower. However, theoretically, if all of those are blended and they're controlled and what have you, the power output is automatic. My purpose with designing that engine was just one: fuel efficiency. Way back when I was a boy, I attended a meeting here in Chicago, and Fred Duesenberg was there. He was the speaker. It was an SAE meeting. And he, believe it or not, at that time, and I'm talking now 75 years ago, Fred Duesenberg said, our goal is 50 miles to the gallon.
Wow, that's amazing.
It certainly is amazing. Nobody's ever come even close to that. But that's what Fred Duesenberg, one of my teachers, one of my tutors, and one of my well, I admired the man, and I respected his knowledge and his theoretic ideas, and I followed in with it, and I agreed with him. And, well, very much so. And Fred Duesenberg and his brother Augies were opposite of what mine is. They were going to do it with a very small engine. And they were the first ones that come out with a blower, with a supercharger.
Oh, I see.
And that was their theory and their way. 40 cubic inch engine with a blower and a small combustion chamber and very high speeds. And I just went the other way. I went with the proper and the right fuel and with the right combustion chamber design, and that's how I wanted to obtain my burden. And then I had to go to carburation.
I see.
Now, with carburation, you have fuel injection, which means that your fuel is mixed in a mixing chamber.
This is your Bendix
no, it's
injection?
not a Bendix. It's a valve.
A valve, I see.
That's right. It's not Bendix. It's
Okay.
nobody's. It's a valve, and it is a valve, an air intake and volume control valve that Bendix uses on the same size of engine in aviation.
I see.
And because of availability and because the size was correct for what I needed and what I would like to have, they were kind enough to cooperate with me and supply me with whatever parts they were using, and they supplied me with this. In fact, I worked with them in this carburation and in this design thing, and they did all they could to help me. But the idea is mine.
And I notice the throttle comes right off of this valve, and of course now explain us how it goes into this plenum and how it's distributed in the engine.
Well, is this your term, or just what is this? What purpose does it serve? What does it mean? What is it going to do? And why?
All right, I'll
Why?
ask you about this plenum then, and we'll finish this up, and
That's
then
right.
I'll go into Cliff Griffith being the last driver.
That's right,
Right, so
and
you'll-
that's the proper way
Yeah.
to do it.
So you'll finish up with this.
Yeah, and then I'll
Okay,
talk.
with this angle.
Yes.
Then we'll come back and then we'll shoot some cutaways of just the engine with the pointer with some of the specific points where
Okay.
that you were discussing.
He wants to do some dress-up shots.
Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
so that we can cut into them.
But you tell them about Cliff Griffith. You should get that in now while
Yeah.
you're on this.
You want to get it in now?
You know, you
And
got.
then I'll get the Cliff Griffith thing in, and then we can finish up with...
Okay, well, we just finished up on the throttle. I think
Yeah,
that
we're
was
gonna
the
go
last
into the
question.
plenum
Okay,
now. Yeah.
Plenum, all right.
When we-
The car at the Speedway.
Okay.
And who drove it?
Okay.
Was Cliff Griffith your last
Okay.
test driver?
Okay.
Was that your last test run at this? Yes.
Okay.
And then we go on.
We just got a little bit left on the tape.
Oh.
We're just gonna go ahead and
The
shoot a
plenum.
little bit,
Oh, I see. Okay. This does not look like carburation to me. It does not look like normal fuel injection. What is this?
Well, it's what I think, and I hope, and I feel that it's going to be the answer, plus my energizer, my metal energizer, and together with this thing, I think that we can control the hydrocarbons and the carbon monoxide in the atmosphere to a higher degree than anybody that will ever attempt to do it and will compete with us. This is measuring fuel and air, and of any kind of liquid fuel that will ever be used for an internal combustion reciprocating engine, and to the highest degree. Why? Because I, in my attempt to govern the fuel-air ratio, have gone to the extremes that I had this air flow and volume and everything that you can do with air in my way that I thought was perfect in a pipe organ, like you have in church and some of the theaters and in some of the baseball. And that's what I had done to this. I had this tuned the same as you tune a pipe organ. It's perfect.
Explain that.
Well, it's in volume,
Okay.
and it's in the volume, and it's in the control, and in the timing. It has to be, because you're controlling sound itself.
In other words, you're bringing that resonance down to such a
Right
fine...
to the finest point that is humanly possible, and the humanly possible up to now. There may be some other means, but I doubt it. But what closer can you get to where you push a key and get the exact tone? Well,
Boy.
that's what I'm doing. I'm getting the exact tone in here that you get in an organ.
And what you're telling me is that you are supplying almost exactly the same volume of fuel and air to each cylinder?
That's right.
Well,
the
that's-
same as you do when you push a key on a pipe organ. The same thing. It's
And-
perfect, absolute control.
Joe, that's a first. I've never heard of that.
Well, nobody else has. There's even no theory even written about that. You're hearing something now, some of my secrets. I'm right now, I'm opening the book. I'm letting you in on some secrets. I don't think that anybody has ever given that any consideration. But that's the only way you're going to do it. That's the only way we can control this air pollution problem that we have in the world today, and we have to do something about it, and soon. Because if we don't, it's going to change our way of life and the entire world.
Well, that's amazing. Joe, let me ask you another question then. This is your test bed for the six-cylinder engine. When is the last time this car ran at Indianapolis, and who was its driver?
Well, Cliff Griffith was the driver, but the exact time, I don't know. Was it, in the 60s?
Well, you have a sticker on the side of the car here that says 63, so 62, 63.
Well, probably 63, and Cliff Griffith drove the car. I had no intentions of, because that already was a speed contest. The Indianapolis 500-mile race today is a thrill show, and it's nothing but speed, speed, speed. They're up into 235 miles an hour, and I can't see any practical reason for that other than entertaining and thrilling a large crowd of spectators. All I'm interested in is performance, and that's what that speedway was designed and built to be used for, and I used it to its ultimate. I don't think anybody has spent more time at that speedway than I have.
How many years did you spend at that speedway, Joe?
Oh, I started in 1930, and I was active. When I would put in 20 hours, the average garage was used for 8. That's the ratio. I was there with 2 and 3 crews. I lived there. I laid on that floor at times 24 hours a day. And I'd go in there on a Monday and I didn't leave till Thursday. And I
30,
was laying on that floor.
30 to 40 to 50 to 63. That's 33 years. That's how many cars start the race.
That's right. That's right. And I did that.
Okay, Joe, let's talk about the performance of the Lencki 6 in this chassis. When is the last time this car ran at the Speedway, and who was the driver?
Well, Cliff Griffith was the driver, and you got the tags on there. What year does it say?
63.
63. Well, Cliff Griffith was there with me in 63, and I had no intentions of running in the race because it was a speed contest, and I didn't have any interest or had no reason to participate in the speed contest. However, he drove the car, and they had a measured quarter mile on the back stretch there, and they could time exactly at the highest point of speed on the entire speedway in that quarter mile. And lo and behold, Cliff got through there just a little bit faster. You know what the record was at that time with the car, and I think you know from some of the comments that you heard about this. What was it? What do you feel that it was at that time?
Well, I know, Joe, that when I was at the Speedway with you one time, you introduced me to Cliff Griffith. That's just a few years ago. And I remember him telling me, he said, Ed, when I was on the back stretch and out of the corner of my goggles, there were 3 inches of haze coming off of the top tires. And he went through that quarter trap 214 miles an hour when he was driving this car.
And the other cars were running what?
Well, they were, let's talk about that. You put this engine, I believe, let's see if my memory serves me correct, you told me 1961 Roger Ward in the leader card, in Wilkie's leader card, car won the 500. Now, just after that race, you tell the audience, you took your 6. Now tell us what happened.
Well, I called Wilkie up, the car owner, and I said, Wilkie, I want to run a test. And he said, well, what have I got to do with a test? I said, well, I need your car. He said, what car? I said, the car that won the 500-mile race. He said, you're going to use my car for testing, and it just got through winning the 500? Why, it already revealed that it was the top and the best and what have you. I said, yeah, but it doesn't reveal nothing to me. I said, now, if I'm going to test, what is a test? It's performance comparisons. So I said, you let me have the car and the driver, if possible, and I will put my engine in it, and we'll compare what the winner does in comparison, or what my engine does by comparison with the winner at this time. And he said, Joe, he said, you're impossible. He said, I got the winning car and everything else, and we're going to make all kinds of changes. No, we're not going to make any changes at all. All we have to do is weld on 2 little front motor supports on the front of your chassis. Just a couple of inches is all it's going to do. We don't need any hood on. We don't need anything. Just move them on there and drop the 6-cylinder engine on there. Are you sure of that? I said, yep. He said, Joe, I'll call Indianapolis and tell them to get the engine out, and you go there and put your engine in. How long is this going to take? I said, not much, just a few laps. I said, I ain't going to wear your chassis out. He said, okay, Joe, go ahead.
And Watson was his mechanic.
And Watson was the original designer of this type of roadster car.
A.J. Watson.
That's right.
Okay.
So we did that, and we dropped the engine in, and we had one of the drivers that drove the winning car there, and put the engine in, and well, the results and the records speak for themselves. What did you find?
Well, you told me, and I did check, and I believe at that time the pole position car was 146 miles an hour, and when this engine in Wilkie's car, after the win, he turned, or this car with your engine in it, turned 2 laps, just warming up at 154 miles an hour. And I think you made a lot of people upset, Joe.
Yes, I think. No, I didn't.
I think the Offenhauser or Meyer and Drake people, there was a little controversy about that.
I didn't upset anybody. The engine did, and the performance of the car did, not me.
Well,
So I'm sorry that I did that, but that's all we run. I don't believe that you can obtain all the necessary answers in a laboratory. You don't. Your performance has to be where you use it, not in a laboratory. And laboratory tests, yes, they're excellent as starting directorates. Aiming the gun. You do that in a laboratory. You aim the gun. But you pull the trigger when you're out on the highway. You're out on the roadway, and with whomever is going to pull the trigger. It may be a lady. It may be a young 14-year-old, 16-year-old student driver. But that's where the performance begins and ends, there. It's a good starter in a laboratory. But the finisher is in the hands of where you're going to use it.
well, Joe, do you have anything else that you'd like to say about this beautiful car, and especially the Lencki 6 engine?
Well, all I hope is that they not necessarily change, but I hope that they adjust the rules at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And now, we have a problem here and in the world where we must control the emissions out of our automobiles. And there's only 2 ways of doing it. The one easy way, and if they want that answer, I'll give them that too. Start by cutting a half of the automobiles that are in the world now. So you cut your emissions in half, and then go on from there. That's the easy way out. What do you think would happen in this world if you had to remove half of the automobiles in the world? It would change our entire way of life. We'd have to change everything if we did that. And not only one way, but in every way, with our employment, with anything that we're doing, because it is the leader and it is the supplier of everything we have in our life today. However, if something like this can make the difference, and I believe, honestly believe, that it's going to make the difference, there's only one other thing that concerns me, is how much fuel do we have in the ground? How deep is that lake? What is the volume? And how long is it going to last? And what do we have to invent, supply, develop, what have you, to exchange for it? That's going to make the difference in the entire world as to what we're going to do. And we better start now, or it'll be just as too late as this flood control that we had in the city of Chicago now. By comparison, this is a little drop in the bucket. And just use your imagination and try to realize and think what difference that's going to make. And we can do it. It'll take a couple of years, but we'll start immediately by making enough difference that it'll be worth the while to start now. They don't have to make any other changes. Just start with a comparison and with a change in the rules. If in next year they start where they ended, in 1936, Louis Meyer won the 500-mile race on 37.5 gallons of fuel. Today, they warmed their engines up, and they have a supply of at least 300 gallons to run the 500-mile race.
Well, Joe, that's a very interesting observation, and I think we'll close on that. And we would like to thank you very much for allowing us to come in your shop here and to speak with you today. Thank you very much, Joe.
My pleasure. I'm glad that I can forward this information, and I hope it attracts the attention, and not only that, but the necessary action to try to do what it was meant to do. I'll be happy and satisfied if it does.
Thank you very much, Joe. Okay?
Okay, go ahead.
Let's go into the combustion chamber, Ed. From the premium tube, point to going in, that's right. That's right. Do you want me to open this
No.
valve with the control? Well, you go to the spark plugs and you got it.
Okay.
Okay. Where do you put the,
No, yeah, that's right. The back one. Yeah, now you're gonna have to go all the way down to the bottom and
Yep.
get it off.
Drop the bracket on the front underneath the magneto on gully fan. Front little bracket.
You can hold this up.
Off the top there, go ahead.
got it, Joe?
Yep. Got it?
Aluminum.
You know, if you want tea or something, we got it.
Oh, great, thank you. What do we do without Eddie?
Lencki, you didn't sleep last night again.
How come?
That's my problem. I don't sleep at all.
I don't either.
I don't sleep at all. And I'm waiting for Ed, and I sit in my living room. I got the doors all open and everything. And I fell so sound asleep, sitting waiting for him for maybe 5 minutes. But I don't know how long it took before he got there. But gets up and he wags his tail and he runs around and he's all right. He gets tired again, he lays down. He don't look at the clock.
And say, I gotta go to bed at 8.
Okay. And this is the way I've always been, but now,
I should take some walks, you know.
oh, I don't want to take no drugs. I don't want
Walks?
to take no needle, no drugs. None.
No, take a walk.
Well, I do walk in the house. I walk. And today they were saying, if you don't smoke in the house, stay home. If you got a lot of people smoking cigarettes and pipes and what have you, and if you got somebody cooking and you're polluting the inner atmosphere, well, then go out if it's less out. And if it's less in, stay in and don't go out. Okay. Well, there's nobody cooks in the house, nobody, and I don't smoke and nobody smokes in the house. So, you know.
Well, you eat out all the time, or
Huh?
don't you cook? Do you eat out?
Well, I got an old bag that cooks for me, and she brings it there, and then she comes.
Oh.
She comes on
So she cooks
Monday
at her
and
place.
Wednesday, and you saw that old
Oh,
bag.
she was
there.
in there, yeah.
Well, that old bag comes up there, and she brings that stuff, and she changes the towels, but no cooking at all in the house, none. It's absolutely the way the doctor told her to do it. The doctor told her to do it. He said, you cook this for him, give him this food, and give him this to drink. Ed, we got to take a bottle with us. I run out.
Okay.
Remember. And drink, I'm going to tell you something. I drink alcohol like water.
Now?
I was only drunk twice in all my life.
But you don't
100
drink.
years ago.
You don't drink now.
100 years ago.
Oh.
Okay? Now, the doctor said, take a couple of ounces twice a day. He said, put
You know,
the big stuff.
For
Yeah.
his four-cylinder engine, we could do it, and he could be standing or sitting on the tire of the 45. When Raul comes in here, I can move this into place here somewhere.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, he could sit just right here. This way, he's, you know, like this.
Well, we could do a bit different setting, you know, let Raul, we'll move this where he
Are you
wants
going
it.
to start doing that now?
Yeah, we're gonna do engines now, Joe. We'll do the 4.
We don't want to go too much long. We'll go maybe another hour if we can.
Yeah, 1 more hour. When? Joe Lencki, what kind of jewel are we standing next to here? This is history.
This is
How far back, Joe?
This is the only one of its kind, probably the last of the Mohicans in racing. This goes back to, it started up here about 1918, and it started to go on paper around 1919, and it started coming out in pieces about 1920.
Okay, Joe, this is the Joe Lencki 4-cylinder engine. Tell us a little about this engine, Joe.
Well, I started out with a Franti Ford. Art Chevrolet was a very, very close and dear friend of mine, and Louis and Gaston Chevrolet were friends, but Art and Art was the dirt track, and he was the Franti Ford representatives, and he went to all the races, all over the dirt track races on the half and the mile tracks, all over the United States. And I never went west of the Mississippi. I went as far as as South Dakota, and all of from the south on up north, up into New York and Pennsylvania and what have you. And I stayed on this side, and Art stayed the same way. And our principal tracks were the half mile at Crown Point, Indiana, and the mile at Roby. The Roby track was as famous and probably was where everybody, when they came from the coast before they even went to Indianapolis, they raced one race at Roby with their Indianapolis cars a couple of weeks before the 1st of May. They'd have a special race, and we participated with them. And they were lucky if they could beat us on the dirt. And them same cars that go to Indianapolis, and that started right from 1911 on.
I see.
And as I say, when I started with a Fronty Ford, and I had a Ford rocker arm head on it. And of course, I was already then planning and aiming for Indianapolis, and I had this in mind, and we started to put it on paper, and we finished it about 1922, I'd say. We finished it. And
Tell us about it, Joe.
well, this
What are the advantages on your design over the engines that were competing?
well, this was an extremely high torque engine, and all you have to do is take a view and look at what you see here. These pistons sticking out of here, and that'll reveal what the compression ratio was, and think of the time. And we're talking hemispherical combustion chamber when I had it, and then compare it with what the Chrysler Corporation had 10, 12, 15 years later.
Well, how about 30 years later?
Well, okay, 30 years later. You're going to make an old man out of me. Go ahead.
Okay.
But it was fantastic. It was fantastic.
I mean, you did this in 1920, and as a very young man, in the early 50s, when I started wrenching cars, that's when I seen the manufacturers come out with these. And you did this in the 20s.
That's right.
This
That's
is
right.
amazing, Joe. What was your thinking then with this piston and combustion chamber design?
Well, like it always is, my school was not a college. I made my mind up when I first saw my first race in Indianapolis in 1911, and when I was picked up by a couple of race drivers and set in their race car, an 8-year-old boy, bug-eyed, and just thrilled to death, and Joe Dawson picked me up and put me in his car for a few minutes before the 1911 500-mile race, and Johnny Jenkins was there, a friend of his, and they sat alongside of me, and they wanted to know what I was doing and who I was and why I was and everything else. I was so vociferous, and I was, well, just out of control. And lo and behold, they wanted me to come back, and I did the next year and the next year and the next year until 1947. I didn't miss a race, only the timeout for the the World War
II
timeout and the World War II timeout.
I see.
But 1911, I'm sitting in his car. Dawson, 1912, Joe Dawson wins the 500-mile race.
Well, you had to be happy about that.
Well, who could be happier? Not even Santa Claus could duplicate that. But Dawson won the race, and I think Johnny Jenkins, he finished about 6th or 7th in that race, and he is the Johnny Jenkins of the Chicago Daily News, who was automotive editor of the Chicago Daily News, and I think I'm revealing that secret for the first time now.
I see.
I don't think anybody ever had them related or linked. But Johnny, he didn't even tell me until I asked him secretly one time, "Are you the Johnny Jenkins?" Years later, and he just nodded, yeah.
How about that?
So there's a very, very odd and a very interesting relationship there. But this engine, and with one of my dirt track cars that I have here, we raced this on the dirt until 1933.
I see.
And I honestly believe, I'm not boasting or overestimating, but I think our records will reveal that it has won more dirt track half-mile and mile races on the dirt all over the eastern part of the United States than any car in the history of racing, and it has established quite a number of world's records, not only track records, and it probably had more racing drivers use this engine in the various cars that I had it in than any other car owner or what have you ever had. I honestly believe if we check our records, we'll find over 50 of the most prominent and world-known race drivers drove this engine.
Well, crankshaft, the bore, stroke, and about how much horsepower it put out. Let's do that now.
Oh, you want it up? I think
Okay. Okay, Joe, let's get into the inside of the engine a little. Would you just briefly explain the bore, stroke, the horsepower output? What kind of horsepower was this engine putting out?
This thing was putting out 400 horsepower, but the torque was unbelievable. I couldn't tell you offhand right now just what but it was, by comparison, this was the only engine that could toss the racetrack over the roof of the grandstand.
I heard that.
And the people would move back and move back when he was out there running, and finally they'd be up in the top row and you could see them ducking when they'd get a clot up there tossed at them from the driver that was in the car.
You're talking about when he'd throw it into the corner, it would throw the clay, the torque from the rear.
When he put his foot on, and it'd come from up over the roof of the grandstand.
Well, I've had some of your old mechanics and drivers tell me that, Joe. What kind of, approximately what cubic inches was this engine, Joe?
About 220 cubic inches.
About 220?
Yeah.
I see. And I notice you have very big half-inch hold-down bolts for the cylinder head that goes on this thing. How many main bearings in this engine, Joe?
5. There's 5 main bearings in it, and it's our own. There's no stock parts in this engine at all. None.
It's completely designed.
It's Lencki engine every inch. There's no stock parts. There's no other parts of any other racing engine.
Can you tell us a little about the foundry that worked with you on this?
When I started the design on this thing, and I got it down on paper, I had there was a pattern shop here on the south side of Chicago. If I'm not mistaken, in the area of about 53rd and Morgan Street or so back then, and they made the patterns, and believe it or not, one of the race drivers in the first 500-mile race at Indianapolis, and his only race there, Joe Jagersberger, who drove the case in the 1911 race, and he had a wreck. His mechanic fell out of the car during the race,
oh boy.
And they hit the wall or what have you, and that was Joe's last race. And Joe was married to the daughter of the owner and operator of the Racine Foundry in Racine, Wisconsin, and it was the most modern and was at that time supplying all of the car builders in Detroit and around the world with their castings. And of course, I knew Joe. I met him at the end of 1911, 12, and in there.
Excuse me, Joe. Is that how the name Ray Joe had? Or Ray Joe, Racine Joe?
Racine Joe.
Oh, that's where Ray Joe came from.
That's right.
Okay.
And he made that cylinder head. And before I got into this engine here, I did use 1 or 2 of his cylinder heads. He was kind enough to give me the consideration to make some changes in the combustion chamber. And it too had records and made records. And he finally started to make my head and use it on his. But this was built by Ray Joe, not built by him, the castings, the cylinder block, and the cylinder head castings. All the cast iron castings were made by him. The gear tower and the aluminum castings, the crankcase and what have you, was done here in Chicago. Yes, I think, no, not the gears were made in Chicago. The castings were made in Indianapolis.
I see.
And but very, very successful. And you're looking at the first engine. I mean, this is the original Lencki engine. A friend of mine, and who also is a collector of old racing cars, was attracted and called to Portland, Oregon. And recently, this is 19 whatever, and he found this thing in that Portland, Oregon in the warehouse up there, and the minute he saw it, he knew who and why and what, and he purchased it immediately and put it on one of his trucks and sent it here, and made me a gift of it. But it is the original engine.
That was a surprise, wasn't it, Joe?
Well, it was more than a surprise. I mean, how can you stretch your imagination any further than that? I couldn't understand how that was possible, but it was, and it is. And well, if anybody, there are photographs. Now, this engine, this particular engine, Louis Schneider won the 1931 500-mile race at Indianapolis, and he was one of my drivers. I was his coach, and Billy Arnold was another one of my drivers in 1930, and I was his coach. And Billy won it in 30, Louis won it in 31, and I didn't get there with this engine in the Miller two-man car until 1933.
I see.
And in its first warm-up and its first exercise laps at Indianapolis, it shocked everybody there.
You raised a few eyebrows.
I more than raised the eyebrows, because both Billy Arnold and Louis Snyder, who had won the two previous races, were out there running a fast 105, 106 miles an hour. And I told Sawyer, just before sundown, I said, Johnny, go out there and run about 3-4 warm-up laps. And he had the famous Ed 20 Grand Steinbach as a riding mechanic, and any race buff knows who 20 Grand Steinbach was. And they warmed up a couple of laps, and he put his foot in it for 3 or 4 laps, and lo and behold, he's running over 112 miles an hour.
Wow.
And I told him, don't go any more than 2-3 laps and get it back in the garage. And he did. He run them 2-3 laps at 112 plus miles an hour and pulled it in the garage, and it wasn't but about 10 minutes later, we were located in the foreign garages, not in the inner circle at Indianapolis. It was my first race. And lo and behold, Pop Myers at the beginning of the parade, and the Firestone, and the Bosch Magneto, and, well, everybody, the few people and all, were following him, and Pop wanted to know, where's that car? Who's that?
Okay, Joe, then let's summarize here, and I'd really like to take our audience and look at the cylinder head that goes on this engine.
Well, let me finish just a minute. After the parade came with Pop Meyer and all of them, they moved me into the inner circle, in the gasoline alley. And when we got into gasoline alley, then we were in, and that was the beginning of my career at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the 33 500-mile race. Johnny Sawyer, driver, 20 Grand Steinbach, riding mechanic. Now, if you want to turn back here and go over to see the top of this thing that fits on top of here, the important part.
That's right. Come on,
the cylinder
Joe.
head.
Let's go
and
here.
the combustion chambers. We can come here and take a look at them. Now, this is extremely unusual, because even by today's designs, I feel that, and I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that there's nothing equal today. Now, with this small combustion chamber, by comparison, it has the largest valves that was ever used in any automobile at any time. The intake valves are 2 1/8 inches in diameter, and the exhausts are 2 to 16. And nobody ever had a valve that size. Nobody.
Joe, I can tell you, when I saw this cylinder head the first time, and you know, I was very impressed. From 15 feet away, it looked to me like a 53 or 54 Chrysler or DeSoto Fire Dome hemispherical head. And I'm talking 53, 54, and I am really astonished. And I know our audience will be to know that you did this in 1920.
That's
With
right.
those valves and these ports here, my gosh, this thing must have had a breathing capability unequal to anything on the racetracks.
Well, it did that with actual racing performance. I mean, there's no conversation about it. The 3A, the American Automobile Association, were the governors and the people that were running the races, and the SAE was their field men that checked on all of this to see whether you were within or without the rules of operation at that time. And there's no exaggeration. It had to be within them rules, and the record speaks for itself. More records than any car in the world on the dirt, half-mile and mile tracks.
And I'd like to add, Joe, I see here you have double overhead camshafts.
Yes.
1920s.
Well,
Unbelievable.
well, that's true, but they were already into overhead. I think they were. I think that the Marmon and Case and the White and the cars that were running with the engines, they were very close. And of course, after I got to Indianapolis and they got to peaking a little bit, they saw some of this, because the difference between Joe Lencki and his operation at the Speedway, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway was my college. That's where I got my SP degree, and I made it my college in my school. Why? Because I feel that a school is a place of congregation of the teachers, and my teachers were unequal, because Tom Edison and Harvey Firestone and Luther Burbank and Henry Ford and the Chryslers and the Packards and Colonel Vincent with Packard and you name them, they were all there. And when I got to Indianapolis, all the garages were locked and the shades and the curtains were drawn, because everybody had either a Miller or everybody had a Duesenberg, and they could see each other's secrets, and they had to keep them covered. Well, Joe Lencki didn't have no secrets to cover, because he had his own little engine and his own little car there, and my doors were wide open. So consequently, my visitor at my gallery attendance that I had was unequaled. And until my last time there, I never closed the door. And all they had to do was come in and sign a register, and they were welcome. I asked all the questions. They came to ask the questions, and I did it, because they were my teachers. And they were the one that told me what, how, where, and when, and I had to be able to nitpick to see what to use. And as it may be and seem, I was lucky. I was picking the right ones. So I had a very, very satisfactory and unbelievable record at my participation at Indianapolis. And I raced there until 1947. I mean, I participated until 1947. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Press Tucker, who was a very good friend of mine, started his Tucker car plant here in Chicago, the old Dodge Chicago aircraft engine plant, and I put in my time there too during the war, building the R-3350s that dropped our cards, our cards that we let them know that they were there, our introductory cards, at Hiroshima, Nagasaki. And very few people or very little publicity was put out about that, but all of the B-29 engines were built in the Dodge Chicago plant and I was supervisor of assembly, preparation for storage, packing, and shipping. And I had approximately 4,000 ladies that put them engines together, and all I had to do was help them if they needed a little assistance. But they were the ones that built the B-29 engines, the highest output, highest performing internal combustion chamber reciprocating engines in the history of the world. Until today, there's nothing greater, better, or improved in existence now.
So
And that was right done here with the ladies in the Dodge Chicago plant.
So then,
Who
Joe-
were they? Who were they? The mothers, the aunts, the wives of the boys that were flying them. You couldn't get a better team together. Perfect. Never lost an engine in the test cell. Not one out of, I would say, approximately 25,000 that came out of there.
So, Joe, the 20s and the 30s, the racetracks, all these people, the Chevrolets, the Fords that you met,
It upsets me when they make fun of schools like Caltech and MIT. Caltech is well known all over the world, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and they use them numbers and letters instead of naming the name of the institution, and the teachers and the scientists and the chemists and all of them. And I felt that when I went to my school at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, I'd try to qualify for an SP degree. And probably there's a little curiosity about the SP versus the DS. Well, it's superior performance. I wanted a degree in superior performance in my designs and what I did at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And in the very near future, I'm going to get my belated diploma from Indianapolis in a couple of days. It's a little late, but better late than never. And I will get my diploma and my degree from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, my school, which I am so proud of, and not only proud of the school itself, but of the superior and outstanding and the most wonderful teachers that were available in the world. And they were so kind and spent so much time with me and directed me and assisted and helped me in anything that you see here. It's all here. And it's their product more than mine. All I did was try to execute and use the lesson and apply it the way I thought that they would like to see me apply it, and more than ever for the reason and purpose that I did it. We're now confronted with this pollution thing. I think when history will repeat itself and will be chosen and will be questioned, they'll find out that probably, and I honestly believe, that we're going to be the foundation of the control of pollution, automotive and otherwise, in the world. And if that happens, I'm ready to start my next chapter with a book instead of doing it the way I'm doing it now.
well, Joe, we'd like to see that, and I just wondered what the SP was, and you explained it very well. Okay, Joe, let's go back to your cylinder head. We've got it right side up now, and we see two beautiful camshafts on here, and it's quite a unique design. Would you like to explain a little about this? And
Well, unfortunately, there are a couple of bearings removed. I had bearings there and there in between, and they were removed.
Oh, I see.
And this cylinder head got away from me, not only the cylinder head, but the engine. I only got it back recently from a friend of mine, and It was in circulation, and he picked it up in a warehouse in Portland, Oregon. But this is the original first Lencki engine. I know that positively.
Okay, Joe, maybe for some of our mechanical audience, what type of fuel ran best in this design for you, and what was your magneto timing? When did you like to fire on this thing?
Well, the valve timing was set for a high torque, not for high speeds. It's not a rever. It's a lower high torque engine, lower speed high torque engine, and was designed for dirt track racing. Now, you can change that a little bit for Indianapolis, for the long straightaways that you have there.
What RPM on these dirt tracks?
Well, this thing wouldn't have to turn much faster than 5,500.
I see.
I mean, and most of the time you were below 5,000 because you'd go on down to chutes, the straightaways, on the half mile and the mile up to, say, 5,000, 5,200. You'd go through the turns in the 42, 4,500 RPMs. But what was important, when you touched that accelerator, all hell broke loose, and you were tossing the speedway over the top, over the roof of the grandstand. Nobody else could do that. This little engine could, and did, all over the eastern part of the United States.
And what was the spark timing approximately? Do you remember that?
Yes, the spark timing on this thing was somewhere, it all depends on the track and what the requirements, but somewhere between 32 and 35 degrees.
I see. Okay.
And we use the coldest plug that you can get, the R2. There is no colder plug. It's absolutely flat on the insulator inside the core of the spark plug.
And did you have Lencki fuel in this engine at that time?
I always used my own blends. I never used, with the exception of when the rules called for a period of time at Indianapolis when we had to run on stock fuel.
I see.
And then we went right to the filling station, and with the containers, with the SAE representative, and fill up our tanks with whatever, and it started with 50 gallons, and like I said, it got down to 37.5 gallons in 1936. Then they abandoned that program, and that's why I discontinued participating. Now, if and when they should get back on that program and start with 37.5 gallons, let's go to Indianapolis and see if we can't get that down to 25. I'd like to try it, and I think it's possible. And then we'll talk about air pollution.
Very good. Very interesting, Joe. Well, do you have any other thoughts? We sure appreciate your visiting with us, Joe, today and showing us your four-cylinder engine. Do you have any final thoughts on your little Lencki 4?
Well, no, the 4, I don't think we'll use it. I think we'll stay with the 6. And as you can see here, you saw the premium tube on the other one. Well, we started, this is the hemispherical combustion chamber engine. And when I started with this, these are Winfield carburetors, but they're Lencki carburetors, the only ones in existence. They're horizontal, and the engine is designed to use either 4 or 6.
I see.
And I was trying both ways. I was trying with a manifold and with 4 carburetors like you see here, and I also was comparing performance and fuel efficiency with 1 carburetor to each cylinder. In other words, this was not a 6-cylinder engine, this was 6 cylinders on 1 crankcase.
Oh, I see.
That was the difference. And I'd like to continue that program if we get down to car performance. If it's going to be a car contest, not a speed driver contest, I'm interested, and I'll go back.
Joe, I notice on the Lencki 6 engine here, on your 6-cylinder engine, I don't see any gaskets on this engine.
There are no gaskets on the whole engine at no spot. There are some O-ring seals at high pressure points, and that is only at the gear tower end and where the pump supplies it to the lines to go to the engine. But there's no gasket whatsoever on the entire engine.
Joe, you have extensive background in petrochemistry, and we know that you were kind of like the mad scientist with all this fuel mixing that you did. Could you enlighten us, tell us a little bit about what you learned about fuels in all these years? Start way back when your Lencki four-cylinder engine, what kind of fuels were you toying with it or experimenting with at that time?
It's the same as my mother's stove was. We had a stove for cooking in our kitchen, and it was wood-fueled. You used soft wood in a big cast iron stove, and you used parts of a log cut up in pieces that would fit in the combustion chamber of the stove, and it'd heat up fast and supply the energy, the heat energy for cooking. And then in our living rooms, in the dining room, and in the parlor and what have you, we had hard coal stoves. And the hard coal stoves had isinglass sides and front on it. And it was beautiful because you not only heated the room, but at the same time you supplied the most beautiful light that you could possibly get from these glowing coals in that stove. Well, this is a stove. This is what this is. It's a stove.
Okay.
You fuel it with the proper fuel. If you're going to cook, you cook with the fuel that's required. And if you're going to heat, heat. Well, right now, what are we interested in? We're interested in the control of pollutants in the air. Well, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have a fuel blended that will burn progressively and burn totally. Now, if your exhaust temperature is below atmospheric temperature, and the difference is in the velocity caused by the exhaust, you got it made. No pollution. And if you don't have, God pity you.
Can I get you to squeak a little on the Lencki progressive burning fuel, because I know you did invent a fuel like that?
Well, we have one. I have one, and it's composed of 3 or 4 components. It has alcohol, and it has gasoline, and it has benzol. And what is interesting about it is that with some other of the chemicals that I use in its composition, it's a solid in one fuel. It is controlled, and it is held together, and the minute it hits the combustion chamber through the manifolding system with a premium tube like I have, it separates. And when it does that, you have absolute control of burning. I think I have it. I think I have it. And I have it. All I have to do now is just get the proper proportions so that I can follow whatever stroke that there is in the engine and whatever bore is in the volume. But I think
in other words, the burning, when the piston goes down, are you telling me that the pressure stays reasonably equal through the whole power stroke?
A simple answer to that question, it's a steam expansion cycle.
Okay, in other words,
if it's 800 pounds on top, it's 800 pounds on the bottom.
Well, that's efficiency. That's efficiency.
And the differential that you have now with the hydrocarbon fuels that we're burning, it's probably 2,800 on top, and it's maybe 200-300 on the bottom, and that's where your pollution comes from. It's too high, and you're blowing it out of the exhaust pipe. However, the best thermometer and the best indicator that you can find is if you ever attend a race at Indianapolis and one of my engines is in one of them cars, I assure you, the exhaust pipe, the exhaust header on my engine is going to be the one that's least affected by heat. There will be no discoloration. That is my brand.
Why is this a big secret, Joe?
I don't know. I don't understand. Well, maybe it's up here. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's up there. But again, the secret is my school, Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and my teachers. I had some of the best petrochemical engineers in the world assist and help me. But they didn't do one thing. They didn't tell me to be as careful as I should be. And in 1946, I was blending my fuel for the 1946 race, and I knew that it was dangerous, and naturally I didn't want to expose anybody else to the dangers of blending it, and I tilted the containers a little too rapidly, and I had a splash, and I got a couple of drops in my right eye and my left eye, and I'm blind in my I'm totally blind in my left eye, and I honestly believe I didn't get more than 4 drops of fuel in that eye, but I did lose that eye with blending.